A hungry girl is tied to a tree by a cruel man, just for eating some of his food. As she silently cries in the middle of the wilderness, a horse observes the scene from afar. No one expected the animal to have such a powerful reaction. What it does next touches even the hardest hearts. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. Emily. Taylor straightened her wrinkled uniform and took a deep breath before entering the Harrington mansion. At 16, she already carried on her shoulders the burden of being the family's sole provider since her mother had fallen ill. The diagnosis of multiple sclerosis for Mrs. Sarah Taylor had transformed the routine of their small house in the suburbs of Portland. The expensive medications, frequent doctor appointments, and her mother's inability to continue working as a housekeeper made Emily the household provider. The job as a nanny in the Harrington home appeared as a blessing. The family, owners of the largest supermarket chain in the Pacific Northwest, offered a salary that would cover basic expenses and still save a little for her mother's treatment. But Emily soon discovered that the mansion in the affluent neighborhood of West Hills concealed more than wealth and luxury. Taking care of little Sophie, age 5, was the easy part. The sweet and affectionate girl quickly became attached to Emily. The challenge was dealing with Richard Harrington, the family patriarch. A ruthless businessman, he treated employees with coldness and suspicion, especially Emily, whom he observed with a gaze that made her feel constantly watched. Victoria. Richard's wife, on the other hand, seemed to live in a constant state of alertness. She rarely spoke with the employee, limiting herself to quick instructions about Sophie. Her eyes, however, carried a sadness that Emily recognized well. It was the same look her mother had on days of greater pain. That May morning, while organizing Sophie's room, Emily accidentally found a folder inside the hallway closet where she was looking for extra sheets. Inside, documents detailed an operation called Project Daybreak. She didn't completely understand, but saw references to indigenous lands deforestation and numbers suggesting astronomical values. "What are you doing?" Richard's sharp voice surprised her. Emily let the papers fall, startled. "I'm sorry, sir, I was looking for sheets for Sophie and—" "That's none of your business." He quickly collected the documents, his face hardened by anger. "If you talk about this with anyone, you and your sick mother will regret it, is that clear?" Emily just nodded, her heart racing. That night, upon returning to her modest home in the East Side neighborhood, she told her mother everything. Mrs. Taylor, despite her weakness, sat up in bed with a serious expression. "Emily, you need to be careful. Men like him have the power to do a lot of harm." "But, Mom, I think he's involved in something illegal. There were maps of indigenous lands, strange documents." "That's exactly why. The more powerful they are, the more dangerous they become when threatened." Mrs. Taylor held her daughter's hands. "Promise me you'll stay quiet. We need this job." Emily promised, but in the following days she noticed subtle changes in the mansion. Richard began holding nighttime meetings in his office with intimidating-looking men. Victoria seemed more nervous than usual, and Sophie mentioned hearing her father talking about clearing the land once and for all. During one of those nights when everyone seemed to be asleep, Emily heard raised voices coming from the office. She silently approached the partially open door. "We need to accelerate the process. The indigenous people are mobilizing the media," said a man with a deep voice. "We've already bribed who we needed to. Now it's time for more direct action," Richard responded. "And that journalist, she's still snooping around. It will just be another unsolved case, like so many others in this country." Emily covered her mouth to stifle a scream. She was facing something much bigger and more dangerous than she had imagined. She backed away silently, but her arm knocked over a vase that shattered on the floor. The hurried footsteps in her direction made her run. Without thinking, she grabbed her purse and left through the back of the mansion. The light rain falling over Portland soaked her uniform as she ran through the deserted streets with the certainty that she could not return. At home, she found Mrs. Taylor awake, worried about her delay. "What happened, honey?" Through tears, Emily told her what she had heard. Her mother, with a grave expression, picked up the phone. "I'm going to call your Uncle Jack in the countryside. You need to leave the city for a while." "But what about you, Mum? I can't leave you. Now it's your safety that matters. Tomorrow morning you're going to Oakridge. It's just until we figure out what to do." Emily spent the night sleepless, embracing her mother in the small room they shared. In the morning, while packing a backpack with essentials, she heard loud knocks on the door. Her heart froze when she saw through the window 2 men she recognized from Richard's meetings. "Open up. We know the girl is in there." Mrs. Taylor, gathering strength that Emily didn't know she still possessed, led her to the back of the house. "Jump the fence to Mr. Wilson's yard. He has an exit to the street behind. Go now." "I won't leave you, Mum. Go, please. I promise we'll meet in Oakridge. Go." With a broken heart, Emily obeyed. As she jumped the fence, she heard the front door being broken down. The world seemed to collapse on her shoulders as she ran through the streets of a neighborhood she knew like the palm of her hand, but which now seemed like a hostile labyrinth. Without enough money for a complete fare, she only managed to reach the small town of Riverdale halfway to Oakridge. As she got off the bus, with only a few dollars in her pocket and a phone with no battery, Emily found herself completely alone for the first time in her life. Concern for her mother consumed her thoughts, but immediate survival demanded action. She needed to reach Oakridge, find the uncle she barely knew, and somehow save Mrs. Taylor from Richard Harrington's men. On the horizon, dark clouds announced, a storm reflecting the turmoil forming inside her heart. The rain finally poured over Riverdale as Emily sought shelter. With the few dollars she had left, she could only afford a coffee at a simple diner in the central square. The nearly empty establishment exhaled the smell of fried food and strong coffee. An old television broadcasted the local news where a reporter talked about land conflicts in rural Oregon. Another case of dispute involving traditional communities and big agribusiness executives. Journalist Christina Reynolds, who was investigating the case, has been missing for 3 days. Emily almost dropped her cup. It was the same name mentioned in the conversation she had heard at the Harrington mansion. Her heart raced when the journalist's image appeared on the screen, a woman of approximately 40, curly hair, and determined expression. "Any problem, young lady?" The voice came from an elderly gentleman who had sat at the table next to her without her noticing. He had sun-marked skin, graying hair, and attentive eyes behind thick-framed glasses. "No, I'm just worried about the rain. I need to get to Oakridge today." The man observed her frightened expression, wet clothes, and the small backpack clutched to her chest. "I'm Professor Michael Sanders. I teach history at the university in Eugene, but I live here in Riverdale. I'm heading to Oakridge right now for a lecture. I can give you a ride if you'd like." Emily hesitated. Her mother had always warned her about not trusting strangers, but her situation was desperate. "Don't worry," he continued, as if reading her thoughts. "I understand your distrust. You can call my wife first if you prefer. She's the principal at the local high school here." There was something in the calm manner and sincere eyes of the professor that made her accept. During the journey in the old pickup truck, the storm poured down heavily, turning the road into a dangerous path. Michael drove carefully, respecting Emily's silence, who constantly looked in the rearview mirror. "Are you running from someone?" he finally asked, when they stopped at a gas station to wait for the rain to diminish. Emily bit her lip, undecided. Perhaps it was fatigue or concern for her mother, but something made her trust this gentleman with the soft-spoken voice and calm gestures. "I saw and heard things I shouldn't have," she answered finally, looking at her hands. "About powerful people involved in wrong things." The professor adjusted his glasses with a thoughtful expression. "Does it have to do with Project Daybreak?" Emily's eyes widened in surprise. "How do you know about that?" "I'm a researcher of land conflicts in the Northwest. I've been closely following the advances of certain economic groups against traditional communities." He paused. "I've even worked with Christina Reynolds, the journalist who's missing." Emily's heart accelerated. By coincidence or fate, she had found someone who could understand exactly the danger she and her mother were facing. It wasn't a coincidence, continued the professor. I noticed your startled reaction when the report mentioned Christina. And your uniform, I've seen other young women with the same one working for the Harrington family. Emily felt her blood freeze. You know, me? Not personally, but I recognize the signs of someone in danger, and I believe you might have important information. The rain was slowly diminishing, and the professor started the engine again. Let's go to my house in Oak Ridge. It's safer than the bus station. There we can talk better and contact your uncle. Emily remembered her mother and her promise to meet. My mother. I think she's in danger. We need to find her. One thing at a time, replied Michael, with a firm but gentle voice. First, we need to ensure your safety. Upon arriving in Oak Ridge, the professor took Emily to a simple but cozy house on the outskirts of town. There they were received by Mrs. Helen, his wife, a lady with a welcoming smile who immediately prepared dry clothes and a hot soup for Emily. I need to use your phone, asked Emily, after recovering a bit. I have to call my mother. Mrs. Helen brought the device, and Emily dialed the number with trembling fingers. After several unanswered attempts, she let the phone fall into her lap, desperate. She's not answering. Something happened. The professor exchanged a worried look with his wife. Do you have your uncle's contact? Maybe he has news. Emily shook her head. I only know his name is Jack, and he lives here in Oak Ridge. My mother had the address, but... Jack what? Smith. Jack Smith. Mrs. Helen sighed. That doesn't help much. There must be dozens of Jack Smiths in the region. The professor seemed thoughtful. I'll make some calls. I have contacts who can help us locate your mother without drawing attention. While the professor spoke on the phone in another room, Mrs. Helen sat beside Emily. Michael has always been involved in difficult causes, she commented, with a mixture of pride and concern. He and Christina Reynolds documented several cases of land grabbing and threats to traditional communities in recent years. Do you think Christina that something bad happened to her? Asked Emily hesitantly. I don't know, dear, but she has faced dangerous situations before and always found a way. Mrs. Helen squeezed her hand. Just like you will find. The professor returned with a grave expression. I spoke with some contacts. There are reports of unknown men asking questions in the East Side neighborhood in Portland, specifically about a sick woman and her daughter. He hesitated before continuing, and a neighbor commented that she saw Mrs. Taylor being taken away. In a dark car this morning. Emily jumped to her feet. We need to call the police. It's not that simple, replied the professor. If we're dealing with who I think, they have contacts everywhere. We need to be strategic. At that moment, the professor's cell phone rang. He answered with a surprised expression, exchanging few words before hanging up. That was a former student who works at the University Hospital in Eugene. A woman was admitted today without documents, but with symptoms consistent with multiple sclerosis. She was dehydrated and showing signs of stress, but conscious. It could be my mom, exclaimed Emily, a glimmer of hope emerging amid the despair. We'll find out, replied the professor, but first I want to show you something. He took Emily to his office, where maps and newspaper clippings covered an entire wall. In the center, a large aerial photo showed marked lands, and beside it, photos of Richard Harrington in meetings with local politicians. Project Daybreak is not just about indigenous lands, explained Michael. It's a complex scheme that involves money laundering, illegal appropriation of natural resources, and, we suspect, serious environmental crimes in the Oregon rural region. Emily observed attentively, recognizing some documents similar to those she had seen in the mansion. Christina was about to publish a report exposing all of this. Then she disappeared. The professor sighed. And now you appear, with information from the heart of the operation. But what can I do? I'm just a girl who barely finished high school. Sometimes it's the unlikely witnesses who make the difference, replied the professor. What you saw and heard might be the missing piece to dismantle this entire structure. Emily felt an enormous weight on her shoulders, but also a spark of purpose. If her mother was indeed in that hospital, And if what she had witnessed could help bring down people who caused so much harm, perhaps there was meaning in all of this. First, let's go to the hospital, decided the professor. Then, with your mother safe, we can think about next steps. As they prepared to leave, Emily noticed a book on the table. Silenced Voices, The Struggle for Land in the American Northwest, authored by the professor himself. You know, Emily, said Michael, noticing her interest in the book. Some battles seem impossible to win, but history teaches us that truth, even when buried, always finds a way to come to light. For the first time since fleeing the mansion, Emily felt that perhaps there was a light at the end of that dark tunnel. The professor's pickup truck cut through the winding road connecting Oak Ridge to Eugene as night fell over rural Oregon. Emily observed the landscape through the window, her thoughts oscillating between the hope of finding her mother and the fear of what might happen next. The professor's phone rang again. Hello? Yes, we're on our way. He cast a quick glance at Emily. I understand. Keep her under observation and don't register her real name for now. We'll be there in 20 minutes. Any news? Asked Emily, clutching her hands in her lap. The woman is stable. She managed to say a few words, mentioned a daughter named Emily. The young girl's heart accelerated. It's her. It's my mum. It seems so, replied the professor cautiously. But we need to be careful. If Harrington's men took her and then she appeared at the hospital, it could be a trap. Emily hadn't considered that possibility. What would they gain from that? You, Emily, they want you, and what you know. The rest of the journey passed in tense silence. Upon arriving at Eugene University Hospital, the professor parked at a side entrance, less busy. My former student, Ryan, is a resident here. He'll take us to your mother without going through the main reception. A young doctor in a lab coat waited for them near the service entrance. After briefly greeting the professor, he guided them through less crowded corridors to a restricted area of the hospital. She's here, said Ryan, stopping in front of a room. She was registered as an unidentified patient. Shows clear signs of multiple sclerosis in a moderate stage, along with dehydration and exhaustion. Emily entered the room with her heart pounding. Lying on the hospital bed with an IV connected to her arm and a fragile appearance was Mrs. Taylor. Upon seeing her daughter, her tired eyes lit up. My daughter, she murmured, extending a trembling hand. Emily ran to embrace her, tears streaming down her face. Mom, what happened? How did you end up here? Mrs. Taylor took a deep breath as if gathering strength. When those men invaded our house, I thought it would be the end of me. But they didn't want to hurt me, they wanted information about you. And how did you escape? I didn't exactly escape. She coughed lightly. They put me in a car, asking questions about where you might go. I said I didn't know, that you might have gone to a friend's house, but I think they realized I was lying. And then? One of them received a call, something about changing strategy. They argued among themselves and ended up leaving me on a deserted road near Eugene. I think they wanted to use me as bait, hoping you would look for me at home when they realized I wouldn't return there alone. They abandoned me. Professor Michael, who had heard everything from the door, approached. How did you get to the hospital? A truck driver found me and brought me here. Good man. Mrs. Taylor looked at the professor with curiosity. And you are? Emily quickly explained how she had met the professor and what he knew about Project Daybreak. Mrs. Taylor listened attentively, concern growing on her tired face. So it's even worse than we imagined, she concluded. Emily, my daughter, maybe it's better for you to step away, go far away, start over. I won't leave you here, protested Emily. And I can't simply ignore what I saw and heard, the professor intervened. Mrs. Taylor, I understand your concern, but running now might be more dangerous than facing this. They won't give up easily. And what do you suggest, Professor? Asked Emily. Document everything you know, connect the dots, and seek allies. He paused, thoughtful. I have a journalist friend at the Oregonian. He can help us build a solid case. Dr. Ryan, who had been observing the conversation from the door, interrupted. Professor, I need to warn you, a police car arrived a short while ago. They're asking about a recently admitted patient without identification. The tension in the room was palpable. The professor acted quickly. "Ryan, can you transfer Mrs. Taylor to another room? Say she's doing tests or something. I can take her to the neurology ward on the 3rd floor. We have an examination room there that is rarely used at night." "Do that," decided the professor. "Emily and I will leave by another way. We'll meet in an hour at the address I'll give you." While Ryan prepared Mrs. Taylor for the transfer, the professor led Emily through an emergency exit. Outside, they walked quickly to a cafe near the hospital. "We need a plan," said Emily, after they sat at a discreet table in the back of the establishment. "I can't just keep running." "And you won't," replied the professor. "But we need to be strategic. What exactly did you see in the documents at the mansion?" Emily closed her eyes, concentrating to remember the details. There were maps of a region that seemed to be in the interior of the state, areas marked in red with names of indigenous communities, and lists of values, dates of bank transfers to companies with foreign names. "Offshore," murmured the professor. "Shell companies to launder money. I also saw references to something called Operation Cleanup and mentions of a politician, I think a congressman or senator." "Nathan Bradley," said the professor, almost to himself. "He's Harrington's main political ally in the region." Christina had discovered connections between him and the land-grabbing scheme. The professor's cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Ryan. "Patient successfully transferred. Police still on the ground floor, meeting you at the agreed location in 40 minutes. "We need to go," said the professor, putting away the phone. "I know a safe place where we can establish ourselves for a few days while we organize the information." On the way to the car, Emily felt she was being watched. Instinctively, she looked back and saw a man in a dark jacket who quickly averted his gaze. "Professor," she whispered, "I think someone is following us." Michael didn't look back. "Keep walking normally. Let's enter that clothing store." Inside the store, the professor quickly guided Emily between racks of clothes to the back, where there was a service door. A staff member tried to intercept them, but the professor showed something in his wallet that made the young man back off and indicate the exit. "What did you show him?" asked Emily as they exited into an alley. "My old credentials as a consultant or the Human Rights Commission. It still opens some doors." He smiled briefly. "Come, my car is on the other side." They managed to return to the pickup without further incidents. The professor drove for about half an hour, following secondary roads until they reached a small inn on the outskirts of Eugene. "This inn belongs to an old friend," he explained. "He'll let us stay here without official records for a few days." While waiting for Ryan to arrive with Mrs. Taylor, the professor showed Emily an old laptop. "Here is everything Christina and I managed to gather about Project Daybreak in recent months. Documents, testimonies, photos, but we lacked concrete evidence of Harrington's and Bradley's direct involvement." Emily examined the information, recognizing some of the elements she had seen in the mansion. "What exactly are they doing?" "Illegal. Appropriation of indigenous and Quilombola lands for timber extraction and subsequently installation of ethanol plants. But that's just the visible part. Behind it, there's a money laundering scheme that moves millions." "And the journalist, Christina Reynolds?" The professor sighed deeply. "She was undercover, working as an aide for one of the politicians involved. She gained access to crucial documents but disappeared before we could meet." Emily felt a chill. "Do you think she's—" "I'm not sure. Christina is smart and prepared. She has contacts and hideouts. She might just be protecting herself." An hour later, Ryan arrived with Mrs. Taylor. The doctor explained that he had to use a hospital ambulance to transport her, claiming a transfer to a private clinic. "Nobody questioned it much," he said, "but it won't take long for them to find out." "Thank you, Ryan," said the professor. "You better go back and act normally. The fewer people who know where we are, the better." After the doctor left, they settled Mrs. Taylor in one of the inn's rooms. Emily remained by her mother's side while she rested, and the professor went out to make some calls. When he returned, his countenance was serious. "I managed to speak with my contact at the newspaper. He's willing to help us, but we need more. than testimonies. We need physical evidence. Emily looked at her sleeping mother and then at the professor. A growing determination took hold of her. Then let's get that evidence, she finally said. I know where Harrington keeps his most important documents, and I know the mansion's access codes. You're suggesting going back there? Asked the professor, surprised. It would be extremely risky. I don't see another alternative. If we want concrete evidence, we need to go to the source. The professor reflected for a few moments. Not you, Emily. That's exactly what they expect. Then who? You don't know the house, you wouldn't know where to look. We need specialized help. The professor checked his watch. I'll make some more calls. I know people who can assist us in this type of operation. That night, while her mother slept medicated and the professor organized contacts and strategies, Emily looked through the inn's window at the starry sky of rural Oregon. Just 2 days ago, she was a simple nanny struggling to survive. Now she was at the center of a conspiracy involving powerful politicians, indigenous lands, and environmental crimes. She felt fear, yes, but also a growing certainty that she could not simply turn her back. This was now her fight, too. 3 days passed since their arrival at the inn. Emily, the professor, and Mrs. Taylor maintained relative isolation, going out only when absolutely necessary. The inn's owner, a man of few words named Frank, brought the meals and remained discreet about the presence of the guests. That morning, the professor returned from one of his mysterious outings with news. I've made contact with a specialist, he announced, sitting at the table in the small kitchen where Emily was having coffee. Paul was my student many years ago, and today works with digital security. He knows ways to obtain information without us having to physically invade the mansion. How exactly? Asked Emily. He can create remote access to the mansion's computers, but for that we would need someone inside to install a device on the local network. Emily immediately thought of Sophie, the little girl she cared for. Maybe Victoria, Richard's wife. She always seemed so frightened. Maybe she could help us. 2. Risky to approach her directly, pondered the professor. But Paul had another idea. Harrington's companies hold an annual technology fair in Portland, which starts tomorrow. He'll be there, presenting new systems for his stores. And how does that help us? Paul got credentials for the event. We can have access to the company executives and, with luck, to the corporate network system itself. The idea seemed promising, but Emily hesitated. I can't show up there. Harrington would recognize me immediately. Not you, but I can, replied the professor. With Paul's help, I can pose as a representative of a university interested in partnerships. The plan was carefully elaborated during the day. Paul arrived at the inn in the early evening, a man of about 30 with a discreet appearance and calm technical speech. He brought equipment and explained the process in a way Emily could understand. Once inside the corporate network, I can create a back door to access the main servers, including the one that probably contains the project Daybreak files. Emily felt a mix of hope and apprehension. They were finally taking concrete actions, but each step brought them closer to danger. The next morning, the professor and Paul left for Portland. Emily remained at the inn with Mrs. Taylor, whose health was gradually improving thanks to the medications Ryan had managed to send. The hours dragged on as Emily waited for news. Finally, in the middle of the afternoon, her cell phone vibrated with a coded message, the signal that the first phase of the plan had been successful. The professor had gained access to the event, and Paul was trying to connect to the network. That's when everything started to fall apart. The first alert came from Paul himself in an alarmed message. Discovered. Get out of there now. Seconds later, the inn's phone rang. Emily answered with a racing heart. Emily! It was the professor's voice, breathless. They were prepared. They knew we would come. Paul was detained by security. I managed to escape, but they're after me. Don't go back to the inn. Take your mother to the address we agreed on as contingency. The call dropped before Emily could respond. With trembling hands, she ran to Mrs. Taylor's room. Mom, we need to leave here now. Frank, the inn owner, appeared at the door with a grave expression. There are 2 cars parked on the main road, men in suits, they don't look like police. Emily felt the world spin. How had they been discovered so quickly? Is there another way out? She asked, helping her mother to stand up. Through the back, through the woods, it leads to a secondary road. My nephew is there with the car. He can take you. There was no time to gather belongings. Emily took only the bag with the documents and the cell phone and helped her mother walk through the back corridor. Frank guided them through a small orchard to a fence, beyond which a young man waited in an old Ford. Take them to Eugene, Tommy, instructed Frank, to the address they indicate. The young man nodded, helping Mrs. Taylor into the back seat. Emily sat next to her mother, anxiously looking out the window as the car moved away on a dirt road. Where are we going, Mom? Asked Mrs. Taylor, her voice trembling with fear. The professor mentioned a contingency address, replied Emily, trying to stay calm, a house in Eugene belonging to a journalist friend of his. During the journey, Emily repeatedly tried to contact the professor without success. The feeling of helplessness grew with each failed attempt. When they arrived at the address, a simple house in a residential neighborhood of Eugene, they were received by a middle-aged man who introduced himself as Charles, the professor's journalist friend. Michael called me about an hour ago, he explained, leading them inside. He said you might come and that I should keep you safe until his return. Do you know where he is? Emily asked anxiously. Not exactly. He only said he needed to shake off some pursuers and that he would try to recover the equipment Paul left at the hotel. The following hours were of anguishing wait. At night, the local news brought the first bombshell. Renowned university professor detained on charges of attempted invasion of corporate systems. Michael Sanders, history professor and known for his controversial positions on land issues, was arrested this afternoon during a business event in Portland. Emily felt her legs weaken. She fell sitting on the sofa, unable to process the news. The report continued, mentioning that the professor was being accused of industrial espionage and possible involvement with hackers. It's a lie, murmured Mrs. Taylor, embracing her daughter. They're using the media to discredit him. Charles, the journalist, seemed equally shaken. I've known Michael for 20 years. He would never get involved with something illegal without a just cause. The second bombshell came the next morning. Charles woke Emily with a desolate expression, showing her the local newspaper. Searches at Professor Michael Sanders' residence reveal fake documents and equipment for electronic fraud. Police investigate possible extortion scheme against businessmen. This is absurd, exclaimed Emily. They're planting evidence against him. That's how they work, replied Charles bitterly. They create a narrative that completely discredits anyone who threatens them. The news worsened throughout the day. Emily's cell phone received an anonymous message with a video, images of her house in Portland being searched by police who supposedly found hidden drugs. The report suggested that Emily was a fugitive for drug trafficking and that she had kidnapped her own mother. They're destroying our lives, murmured Emily, tears streaming down her face. How can they invent such absurd lies? They have money and power, replied Charles. They control part of the local media and have contacts in the police. The third and most devastating news came in the afternoon. Paul, the security specialist, had been found dead in his cell, apparently by suicide. Impossible, said Charles, angrily turning off the television. Paul wouldn't kill himself. This was execution. Emily felt a wave of nausea and guilt. A person had lost their life trying to help her. The professor was imprisoned, his reputation destroyed, and she and her mother were fugitives with fabricated accusations against them. Maybe we should turn ourselves in, suggested Emily, defeated. Explain everything, tell the truth. And who would believe it? Questioned Charles. They've already built the entire narrative against you. Without concrete evidence, it would be your word against that of powerful businessmen and influential politicians. That night, while Mrs. Taylor rested, Emily sat on the porch of the house, looking at the stars with despair in her heart. All the optimism and determination of previous days seemed to have evaporated. People were being hurt, reputations destroyed, lives lost. And for what? Charles found her there, offering her a cup of tea. I know what you're thinking, he said, sitting beside her. that it's not worth it, that the price is too high. Emily just nodded, unable to express in words the weight she felt. "Do you know why Michael continues fighting after so many years?" continued Charles. "Because he witnessed what happens when nobody opposes evil. Entire communities lose their lands, forests are destroyed, rivers are polluted, and the affected people are always the most vulnerable." Emily looked at the journalist, noticing the fire in his eyes. "Christina Reynolds, the missing journalist, was my wife," he revealed. His voice choked. "She knew the risks, but she always said, 'If not us, who?'" The weight of the revelation fell on Emily like an avalanche. It wasn't just her fight or the professor's. It was the fight of many who had sacrificed much more than she had. "What can we do now?" she asked, feeling small and powerless in the face of the magnitude of the situation. "Continue," replied Charles simply, "but we'll need to be smarter than them. Harrington and his allies control traditional media and have the police in their pocket. We need to find another way." Emily spent the night awake, thinking. By morning, she made her decision. If she wanted to help the professor and honor Paul's sacrifice, she would need to be braver than she had ever been. "I'm going back to Portland," she announced during breakfast. "We need real evidence, and I know where to find it." Charles was adamant in his opposition to Emily's plan. "It's suicide to go back to Portland. They're monitoring everything, every place you might go." "I have no choice," insisted Emily. "The professor is in jail because of us, and the evidence we need is in the Harrington mansion." "And how do you plan to get in there? Security must be doubled." Emily bit her lip without an answer. The determination in her heart contrasted with the lack of a viable plan. It was Mrs. Taylor who broke the impasse, entering the room supported by an improvised cane. "Victoria," she said simply. "Richard's wife." "Mom, we already thought about that. It would be too risky to approach her." "You don't know the whole story, honey." Mrs. Taylor sat with difficulty. "Before you started working there, I occasionally cleaned that house. I knew Victoria when she still smiled. I saw what that man did to her over the years." Emily stared at her mother, surprised. "You never told me that." "Because Richard couldn't know about our connection. When you needed the job, I used my contacts to recommend you. But we pretended not to know each other. Do you think Victoria would help us?" "She has more reasons to hate Richard than both of us combined," replied Mrs. Taylor, with a distant look. "But she also has a lot to lose." Charles, who had listened to everything attentively, stood up. "We have to think of another solution. We can't just show up at the mansion door." The debate continued throughout the afternoon, with no resolution in sight. Emily felt the weight of responsibility increase with each hour the professor remained detained. That's when the doorbell rang, making all three freeze. Charles signaled for them to remain silent and cautiously approached the window. His body visibly relaxed. "It's Ryan," he announced, referring to the doctor who had helped Mrs. Taylor. The young doctor entered hurriedly, carrying a backpack. His face showed fatigue and concern. "It wasn't easy to find you," he said, accepting the glass of water Charles offered. "I had to follow a series of contacts from the professor." "Any news of him?" Emily asked anxiously. "He's in the Portland jail. I got information through a colleague who works in the medical department there." Ryan hesitated. "He's not well. It seems he suffered intensive interrogation." Emily covered her mouth, horrified. "We need to get him out of there." "Impossible. At the moment, security is reinforced and he's being kept isolated." Ryan opened his backpack. "But I brought something that might help." From inside the bag, he took out a black flash drive. "Paul gave this to me before the event. He said it was a backup, in case something went wrong." Emily took the device with trembling hands. "What's on here?" "I'm not exactly sure. Paul just said it contained everything they've gathered so far. I figured you would know what to do with it." Charles connected the flash drive to his laptop. Inside were dozens of meticulously organized folders containing documents, photos, and spreadsheets, all the investigative work that the professor and Christina had done in recent months. "It's valuable," commented Charles, examining the files, "but there's nothing here that we didn't already have." Nothing concrete enough to directly incriminate Harrington or Bradley. Emily felt the discouragement return, another hope frustrated. "There's something else," said Ryan, rummaging in his backpack again. He took out an old cell phone. This belonged to Christina. The professor kept it. "I thought it might contain something important." The phone was password protected. They tried several obvious combinations without success. Frustration was growing when Mrs. Taylor, who had been observing in silence, spoke. "Try Pineville." Everyone looked at her, surprised. It was her hometown. Christina mentioned it once when we briefly talked at the mansion. She said she never forgot her roots. Charles typed the name, and the phone unlocked. His expression mixed amazement and emotion. "How did you—" "Sometimes the person who cleans the house hears more than they should," replied Mrs. Taylor with a small smile. The phone's content was limited. Few photos, some contacts, generic messages. It seemed to be a secondary device, used specifically for the investigation. "There's nothing useful here," concluded Charles, disappointed. Emily, however, noticed something strange. Why would she have a remote camera control app? It doesn't seem like the type of thing a journalist would normally use. Charles examined the app. "It's for a home surveillance system. It allows access to cameras via the internet." "She had hidden cameras?" asked Emily. "Possibly." Charles opened the app, which requested credentials. After a few attempts with the same password, they gained access. The system showed 4 disconnected cameras. "They're offline," explained Charles. "Probably without power or deactivated." Hope withered again, but Ryan, who had been silent, pointed to the screen. "Look at the location of these cameras." The map indicated a point in rural Oregon, a rural area near the California border. "It's the main area of Project Daybreak," commented Charles. "Where the disputed lands are." "Christina installed cameras there?" asked Emily, confused. "How?" "She was resourceful," replied Charles, with a gleam of pride in his eyes. "She must have found a way to document what was happening." "But they're turned off," observed Ryan. "We can't see anything." "Unless someone reactivates them," suggested Charles thoughtfully. A significant silence hung over the group. The idea was too audacious to be expressed aloud, but Emily was already formulating it in her mind. "If we could get there," she began. "Absolutely not," interrupted Charles. "It's a remote area, probably watched by Harrington's thugs. It would be madness." "But if we could get visual evidence of what's happening," insisted Emily. The discussion was interrupted by the ring of Ryan's cell phone. He answered, moving away a bit. His expression became tense during the conversation. "That was my colleague at the jail," he informed upon hanging up. "The professor is going to be transferred tomorrow to a maximum security prison in Seattle. After that, it will be almost impossible to have any contact with him." The news fell like a bomb. Time was running out quickly. "We need to decide now," said Emily firmly. "Either we act or we give up for good." Charles ran his hand through his graying hair, visibly divided. "Going to those lands would be too risky, but perhaps there's another way to reactivate the cameras." "How?" asked Emily. "Christina wouldn't work alone on something so dangerous. She must have had local help, someone from the region who knew the terrain." "And how do we find this person?" Charles took Christina's phone again, examining the contact list. "Here, a number saved only as JW Redwood. Redwood is a small community near the project area. Do you think we can trust them?" asked Mrs. Taylor. "If Christina trusted them, we can too," replied Charles, already dialing the number. The call was answered after several rings. Charles briefly explained who he was, mentioning Christina's name as a reference. He spoke for a few minutes, more listening than talking, before hanging up. "We have our unexpected help," he announced, with the first genuine smile in days. "Jason Walker is a local community leader. He knows every inch of those lands and was the one who helped Christina install the cameras. He can reactivate them." "He would do that?" asked Emily. "He's already on his way to the location. He said he'll need a few hours to get there without being detected." A breath of renewed hope passed through the group. If they could get current images of what was happening on the Project Daybreak lands, they could prove the professor's allegations. "While we wait," continued Charles, We need to prepare a strategy to use this evidence when we have it. The local media is compromised, but I have contacts in national outlets that could publish the story." "And what about the professor?" asked Emily. "How do we help him?" "A national scandal would be the best protection for him," replied Charles. "Once the story goes public, it will be much harder for them to continue with the false accusations." The following hours were of intense preparation. Charles drafted a complete dossier with all available information, while Ryan used his medical contacts to try to ensure the professor received adequate care during detention. Emily and Mrs. Taylor organized the documentation, separating what could be useful as evidence. It was almost midnight when Christina's cell phone vibrated with a notification. The cameras were online again. The group anxiously gathered around the laptop where Charles had transferred the access. The images were grainy but clear enough. They showed an extensive area of forest being cut down by tractors. Armed men patrolled the perimeter. In one of the cameras, an indigenous village was clearly seen surrounded, with people apparently prevented from leaving. "My God," murmured Mrs. Taylor, "they're keeping those people prisoners on their own land." Charles recorded everything, while Emily observed shocked the ongoing destruction. That's when one of the cameras captured something that made her heart stop: a car arriving at the location, from which two men she immediately recognized descended: Richard Harrington and Congressman Nathan Bradley. "It's the proof we needed," said Charles, almost in disbelief. "They're there personally supervising the illegal operation." As they watched, Harrington seemed to be giving instructions to a group of armed men, pointing to the surrounded village. One of the men made an affirmative gesture and began heading there with his team. "They're planning something for tonight," commented Ryan, alarmed. "We need to do something now." Charles was already frantically typing on his cell phone. "I'm contacting all the reliable journalists I know, and a federal prosecutor who has already investigated similar cases." Emily, still looking at the screen, noticed something strange. One of the cameras showed a solitary figure, observing the operation from afar, partially hidden among the trees. Something about that silhouette seemed familiar to her. "Charles," she called, pointing. "Who is that person?" Charles zoomed in on the image as much as possible, and his eyes widened. "Impossible," he murmured. "What is it?" asked Emily. "It's Christina. My wife is alive." Charles's shout upon identifying Christina in the image echoed through the room, bringing a mix of hope and urgency to the situation. Emily watched, astonished, as the journalist enlarged the image as much as possible, trying to confirm his discovery. "It's her, I'm sure," he affirmed, his voice trembling with emotion. "I know that posture, that way of moving." Emily approached the screen. The female figure was partially hidden among the vegetation, observing the movement in the deforested area with what appeared to be a small camera. The image quality didn't allow for clear facial details, but the determination in the cautious movements of that person was undeniable. "If it really is Christina, she's in immediate danger," warned Ryan, pointing to another part of the screen, where armed men were expanding the surveillance perimeter. They seemed to be expanding the search in the area. Charles was already frantically dialing the local contact who had reactivated the cameras. "Jason, is it really Christina? Can you reach her?" The response from the other end of the line seemed to alarm the journalist even more. "How much time do we have? I understand. Yes, we're sending everything right now to the press. Keep her safe, please." Upon hanging up, Charles quickly explained, "Jason confirmed. It is Christina. She's been hiding in the region for weeks, collecting evidence, but now the situation is critical. Harrington authorized a final cleanup of the area for this early tow." "Morning." "What does that mean?" asked Emily, fearing the answer. "They're going to forcibly remove the last residents of the village and destroy any evidence of illegal operations," replied Charles, already working feverishly on the computer. "I'm sending the images and documents to all the reliable contacts I have in the national press and the federal prosecutor's office." Emily observed the images with a growing sense of urgency. In one of the cameras, Richard Harrington was gesticulating, energetically giving orders to his thugs. It was the same man who had threatened her at the mansion, who had transformed her life and her mother's into a nightmare, who kept the professor unjustly imprisoned. "We can't just watch," decided Emily. Suddenly, We need to do something more. We already are, replied Charles without taking his eyes off the computer screen. Public exposure is our best weapon now. And what if it's not fast enough? What if the press takes time to publish? What if they ignore it as they have for years? Emily felt a new determination growing inside her. While we discuss, Christina is in danger. The entire village is threatened and the professor remains imprisoned. Mrs. Taylor, who had been silently observing until then, approached her daughter. Emily, I know what you're thinking, but it's very dangerous. I have a plan, announced Emily, surprising everyone. We don't need to go there physically, we can draw attention to what's happening right now. How? Asked Ryan. Social media, live broadcast. Emily took her cell phone. We have the camera images. We can make a broadcast showing what's happening, mentioning the names of all those involved, Richard Harrington, Nathan Bradley, all of them. Charles seemed hesitant. It would be risky for you to expose yourself like that. They've already built a narrative against you, remember. They could use this to reinforce the idea that you're trying to extort them. Then I won't show my face, decided Emily. I'll just do the narration, showing the images. The important thing is for people to see what's happening there now in real time. The idea quickly took shape. Ryan, who had some experience with video editing, helped configure an anonymous transmission that would allow showing the camera images without revealing Emily's identity. Charles, still transferring documents to his contacts, advised on what to say and how to present the evidence in a clear and impactful way. When you're ready, he said, I'll send the broadcast link to all my journalistic contacts. Even if they can't publish immediately in traditional media, they'll share on their personal networks. The information will spread. Emily took a deep breath, preparing for what would be the most important moment of her life so far. Mrs. Taylor held her hands. You sure about this, honey? Once you start, there's no going back. I am, Mom. If we don't do something now, innocent people will suffer, and everything we've been through will have been in vain. While the final preparations were being made, Charles's cell phone received an alarming message from Jason. Heavy movement in the area. They're gathering all the residents. Christina trying to document critical situation. There was no more time to lose. Emily positioned herself in front of the improvised camera, the surveillance images ready to be transmitted. With her voice slightly altered by a distortion program, she began. Good evening, America. What you are about to see is happening right now on indigenous lands in rural Oregon, an illegal operation commanded by businessman Richard Harrington and Congressman Nathan Bradley. The broadcast slowly began to gain viewers. Dozens, then hundreds of people connected to watch the shocking scenes of illegal deforestation and intimidation of traditional communities. Emily narrated with clarity, mentioning documents, political connections, money laundering schemes, everything they had discovered in recent weeks. Charles monitored the reactions while continuing to contact authorities. It's working, he informed after a few minutes. Journalists are republishing, people are sharing. The number of viewers keeps rising. The impact began to manifest quickly. In the surveillance camera images, it was possible to see men receiving calls on their cell phones, checking phones with concerned expressions. Richard Harrington was gesticulating furiously during a call. They know they've been exposed, observed Ryan. They're realizing the world is watching. That's when one of the cameras captured an alarming movement. Christina, apparently detected by one of the guards, was running among the trees, pursued by two armed men. My God, murmured Charles, turning pale. Emily, still narrating the broadcast, saw the scene and decided to focus on it. At this moment, you are witnessing the pursuit of journalist Christina Reynolds, reported missing for weeks. She is alive and being hunted by armed men on Richard Harrington's orders. This is not a reenactment. It's a live broadcast. The number of viewers skyrocketed. Comments and shares flooded the broadcast. The exposure was now irreversible. Charles's cell phone rang again. It was Jason. The conversation was brief and tense. Upon hanging up, the journalist seemed divided between relief and concern. Christina managed to reach a safe hiding place for now, but the situation in the village is getting worse. Harrington ordered the acceleration of the plan. They want to finish everything before the authorities arrive. Emily intensified her appeal in the broadcast. We ask you to massively share this video. Lives are at risk at this moment. Federal authorities need to intervene immediately. The effect of the exposure began to manifest beyond the networks. Ryan received a call from his contact at the jail. There was unusual movement, orders being changed. The professor's transfer had apparently been suspended. Something is happening, he reported. They seem to be in damage control mode. Charles received confirmation that a federal police team was being mobilized to the area, as well as representatives from the federal prosecutor's office. Public pressure was having an effect. In the broadcast, Emily continued firmly, alternating between different cameras to show the extent of the illegal operation. The number of viewers had already surpassed 100,000 people and continued to grow exponentially. That's when they noticed intense movement in one of the cameras. Richard Harrington was hurriedly entering his car, followed by Congressman Bradley. They were fleeing the scene. They know they're being watched, commented Charles. They're trying to escape before the authorities arrive. Emily felt a wave of indignation. We can't let them escape like this, after everything they've done. The federal police are on their way, reminded Charles. They'll be intercepted. But Emily knew well the power and resources of Harrington. If he managed to leave the area, he would use his contacts to legally protect himself, create an alibi, destroy evidence. Justice might never be served. That's when she noticed something. In the image, Harrington's car had abruptly stopped. Men were hurriedly getting out, gesticulating in panic. One of the cameras, positioned farther away, showed the reason. Dozens of village residents had formed a human barrier on the only exit road. They're preventing the escape, narrated Emily emotionally. The victims themselves are rising up. The confrontation seemed imminent. Harrington was gesticulating furiously to his security guards, who were approaching the barrier with weapons in hand. The indigenous people, however, remained firm. Many of them with cell phones pointed at the aggressors. They were documenting everything. We need to alert the authorities about this specific confrontation, said Charles, already dialing again. The situation could escalate quickly. Emily observed, her heart racing, as she narrated each development to the viewers, who now numbered hundreds of thousands. She knew that each minute of exposure was vital, not only for the immediate safety of those people, but to ensure that the truth would come out completely. Amid the growing tension, her cell phone vibrated with a notification that made her momentarily freeze. It was a message from an unknown number with just 3 words that made her blood run cold. We're coming for you. The threatening message on Emily's phone spread panic through the group. Charles immediately began calling contacts who could offer protection, while Ryan checked doors and windows of the house. They can't know where we are, murmured Mrs. Taylor, squeezing her daughter's hand. It might just be an attempt at intimidation. Emily, however, remained firm in front of the camera, continuing the broadcast. Even under personal threats, I will not stop showing the truth, she declared to the hundreds of thousands of viewers. What you are seeing is the true face of power when challenged, violence and intimidation. On the screen displaying the surveillance camera images, tension was escalating. The standoff between Harrington and the indigenous people continued, with his thugs pointing guns at the human barrier. Harrington was yelling on the phone, visibly desperate. TV networks are already covering the broadcast, informed Charles, monitoring news channels on his tablet. It's becoming a national scandal in real time. That's when the doorbell rang, making everyone freeze. They wouldn't ring the doorbell, whispered Ryan, cautiously approaching the window. His face showed first confusion, then relief. It's the police, federal police. 2 agents identified themselves at the door, explaining they had been sent to ensure the group's safety after receiving information about threats. One of them, who introduced himself as Agent Lawson, explained the situation. We're monitoring your broadcast. A federal prosecutor is already on his way to the confrontation site with an intervention team. We came to ensure your safety after intercepting threatening communications. The presence of authorities brought some relief, but Emily didn't interrupt the broadcast. The camera images now showed a new development. Federal police vehicles arriving at the location surrounding the area where Harrington and his men were cornered by the human barrier. "It's happening!" exclaimed Charles, following attentively. "They're being intercepted." The images were dramatic. Federal agents advanced with weapons drawn, ordering Harrington and his men to surrender. The businessman was gesticulating furiously, apparently trying to explain his presence there, but the agents proceeded with the standard approach. "Richard Harrington and Congressman Nathan Bradley are being detained at this moment," narrated Emily, her voice choked with emotion. "After years of destroying lives and lands, they finally face the consequences of their actions." Agent Lawson, who was observing the broadcast next to Emily, received a communication on his radio. "We just received confirmation. Professor Michael Sanders has been released. The charges against him have been suspended pending investigation of the circumstances of his arrest." The news made Emily momentarily interrupt her narration, unable to contain her tears. Mrs. Taylor embraced her. Equally moved. "He's coming here," continued the agent. "And we have another update. Christina Reynolds has been located safely and is under federal protection." Charles collapsed into a chair, bringing his hands to his face. Years of anguish, of not knowing if his wife was alive or dead, finally ended. The broadcast continued, breaking audience records. Emily, composing herself, resumed the narration as the cameras showed Harrington and Bradley being led to police vehicles. "What we are witnessing today is not just the arrest of powerful criminals, but the victory of truth over silence, of justice over impunity," she declared. "This victory belongs to every person who refused to stay silent, to every community that resisted, to every American who shared this broadcast in the last few hours." That's when one of the cameras captured a movement that made Emily freeze. Among the federal agents, a familiar figure stood out. Victoria, Richard Harrington's wife, talking with the authorities, handing over what appeared to be documents. "I can't believe it," murmured Emily. "Victoria is collaborating with the authorities." "She was always a prisoner in that house," commented Mrs. Taylor. "Perhaps she found her own liberation." In the following hours, events unfolded at an accelerated pace. Professor Michael arrived at the house, visibly worn out by the days of detention, but with an unbreakable spirit. The emotional reunion with Emily and the others was brief, as soon Christina also arrived, escorted by federal agents. The meeting between her and Charles was of an intensity that all present respected with reverent silence. After the prolonged embrace, where words seemed unnecessary, Christina joined the group to explain what had happened. "I discovered documents that proved direct links between Harrington, politicians, and international money laundering operations," she explained. "When they realized I knew too much, they tried to capture me. I managed to escape and hide in the indigenous communities, who welcomed and protected me." "How did you manage to install those cameras?" asked Emily in admiration. "With the help of Jason and local residents. We knew we needed irrefutable evidence." Christina smiled at Emily. "But I never imagined that a young nanny would be the final piece of this puzzle." The next morning, the main newspapers and newscasts in the country highlighted the scandal in their headlines. "Billion-dollar land grabbing and money laundering scheme dismantled in unprecedented operation. Businessman and congressman arrested in flagrante during environmental crime. Live broadcast exposes crimes against indigenous communities and mobilizes authorities." A week later, at a cafe in downtown Portland, Emily, her mother, the professor, Charles and Christina gathered to evaluate the developments. Emily and Mrs. Taylor's situation had been completely clarified, with the false accusations formally withdrawn. The professor, besides recovering his position at the university, had received invitations for lectures about his experience. "I heard that Victoria is in a witness protection program," commented Christina. She handed over crucial documents that Richard kept in a secret safe in the mansion. Details of the entire operation, including offshore accounts and bribes paid to authorities. "And Sophie?" asked Emily, remembering fondly the child she cared for. "She's with her maternal grandmother." "For now," replied Christina. "Victoria specifically requested that you be allowed to visit her, Emily. She knows how much Sophie became attached to you. Emily smiled, moved by the possibility of seeing the little girl again. And what about you? Asked the professor to Emily. And Mrs. Taylor, what are your plans now? Emily and her mother exchanged knowing looks. The Indigenous Peoples Foundation offered me a scholarship, replied Emily. I'll finally start law school next semester. I want to specialize in Indigenous and environmental rights. And I'm going to dedicate myself to treatment, added Mrs. Taylor. With the compensation we'll receive for what we went through, I'll finally be able to access the best specialists in multiple sclerosis. The professor smiled, proud. I knew you had a bright future ahead of you, Emily. From the moment I found you in that diner, soaked by the rain but with fire in your eyes. Charles, who had been observing the square through the cafe window, turned to the group. Look at that, he said, pointing to a newspaper at the stand across the street. The headline announced, Project Daybreak investigation advances and reaches high-ranking politicians. It's just the beginning, commented Christina. Truth once liberated can no longer be contained. Emily observed the city through the cafe window. Portland continued the same, with its accelerated rhythm, its contrasts, its warmth. But something had fundamentally changed, not just in the city or the country, but within herself. From a frightened young woman fleeing in the rain, she had transformed into someone who had helped dismantle a criminal empire. Someone who discovered that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something is more important than fear. Someone who learned that even when everything seems lost, truth finds its way, as long as there are people willing to fight for it. On that sunny afternoon in Portland, as the group toasted with juices and coffee, Emily was certain that her journey was just beginning. Dear listeners, we hope that Emily Taylor's story has touched your hearts. A young woman who, facing the most difficult circumstances, found the courage to challenge the powerful and defend the truth. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories of ordinary people who made extraordinary differences. Find it here by clicking to your left. If this narrative of courage and determination moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Every day we bring American stories that explore the complexity of life, the power of truth, and the strength of resistance. Don't miss our upcoming content